In last week's discussion of Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, it was suggested that if we accept Plato's conception of the body, then we would also have to think that it is wrong to engage in warfare. One reason for this is Plato's devaluation of the body. If the body is significantly less valuable and less worthy of our attention than the soul, and if warfare protects us from bodily harm, then it would seem like the very basis of just war has been undermined. Furthermore, it is not really an exaggeration to say that Plato sees the body as the root of all evil. Plato tells us that 1, our body is an evil attached to our soul, and 2, that discord and warfare can all be traced back to the desires, fears, and anxieties of the body. So do these claims commit Plato to the view that warfare itself is evil? Does warfare necessarily inherit the evil of its root cause? In this video, we will discuss these questions and consider how the Platonic injunction that we must turn away from our bodies could, in the end, serve as a basis for real, lasting social harmony. Let's examine the passage from the Phaedo that is the basis for this discussion. This passage comes amidst the character Socrates explaining how attachment to our body confuses us and inhibits us from achieving the purpose of the true philosopher. That is, the purpose of attaining philosophical knowledge through understanding the forms. Now, crucially, Plato does not just claim that our body is a source of confusion and distraction, although he does say this. He also claims that in being fused with our body, we are fused with something evil, an evil that threatens to prevent the true philosopher from obtaining what he most fundamentally desires. And that, of course, is truth and a genuine understanding of what is most fundamentally real. Let's pause here to consider the significance of the claim that the body is something evil. If something is evil, then we should resist the influence of that thing. For example, if you think that someone in your social circle is morally corrupt or even evil, then you would not want to emulate them. You certainly wouldn't want to listen to their advice. On the contrary, you would shield yourself from that person's influence as much as possible. Now, apply this to what Plato has said about the body. If we know that the body is an evil influence, then we ought likewise to resist its influence as much as possible. Furthermore, if there is some activity which we know the body consistently encourages us to engage in, then we should also take an attitude of suspicion and skepticism toward that activity. With this point in mind, let's take a look at the rest of the passage. How precisely does the body impede the true philosopher from fulfilling her true purpose? Plato tells us that the body fills us with wants, desires, fears, all sorts of illusions, and much nonsense. So at one level, the body simply distracts us by constantly requiring that we tend to it by quenching its thirst, satiating its hunger, and resting it when it is fatigued. However, the demands of the body also have more significant consequences. Plato tells us that only the body and its desires cause war, civil discord, and battles, for all wars are due to the desire to acquire wealth. And it is the body and the care of it to which we are enslaved which compel us to acquire wealth, and all this makes us too busy to practice philosophy. Here Plato is making a claim about the root cause of conflict, division, and warfare. Most immediately, he locates the root cause of warfare in wealth and money, and more fundamentally, he finds that the body is responsible for our attachment to these things. It is responsible for our attachment to wealth and money. Now, I think Plato overstates the case a bit here when he claims that all wars result from our desire for wealth. The reasons for war are numerous: jealousy and personal animus among leaders of state, fear of harm, the need for security, the desire for glory, the desire for power and influence, etc. However, what is really important here is that all of these things result from the body. All of these are some form of desire or emotion that is produced by our body. So, the conclusion we must draw is this: warfare, and really any sort of interpersonal conflict, is something that occurs because of the influence of the body. But remember what we said previously. Since the body is fundamentally an evil, we should be suspicious of any activity that it encourages us to engage in. From this, it would seem to follow that warfare and violent conflict itself should be seen as inherently evil or bad, even presumably when doing so would be necessary for self-defense. And of course, the overall nonchalance with which the character Socrates faces his own impending death might suggest this as well. The strongest argument for the necessity of war is that it is needed to defend ourselves against unjust aggressors. But if death is not something bad for the true philosopher, if, in fact, death is something the true philosopher should embrace, then the primary justification for war seems to lose its foundation. This is the exact same issue that Socrates faces when attempting to explain why his perspective doesn't recommend that we should commit suicide in order to hasten our death. So, does this mean that Plato is a pacifist who believes we must passively submit to those who aggress against us? I do not think this was his intention. At many points in his other dialogues, Plato takes it for granted that courage, and military courage in particular, is an important virtue, as did many people in ancient Greek culture. In fact, only a few pages after the passage we just discussed, Plato talks about the virtue of courage. Although, to be fair, in Plato's view, true courage cannot be motivated simply by fear of what would happen if we were defeated by our enemy. It must be grounded in something higher. Still, I don't think Plato is offering a justification for pacifism here. More fundamentally, what I think he's trying to do is to get us to think more carefully about what causes social discord, division, and violent conflict. Consider the previously mentioned causes of war. Notice that for all these things, there is a zero-sum element involved. Not everyone can get what they want. One nation's desire to live peacefully must come at the expense of another nation's desire to increase their wealth, power, and glory. In order for an aggressive nation to enrich and glorify itself, the peaceful nation must fall in battle. For the peaceful nation, on the other hand, to live in security, then the aggressive nation must fall in battle. This is what produces conflict. Each nation's desires which result, of course, from the body, cannot all be satisfied. Somebody must win and somebody must lose. So, nations go to war. People engage in violent conflict. However, if we understand this, then we can also see what would be necessary to put violent conflict to an end. If it is our desires which bring us into violent conflict, then we can only get rid of that conflict by detaching ourselves from those desires. And of course, for Plato, to resist our desires, we must turn away from the body. We must work to separate our soul and body as much as possible. This is, of course, something that should sound quite familiar. That is because separating the soul from the body is also necessary for accomplishing the true philosopher's purpose. We can only understand the forms once we have severed the connection between our soul and body, a severing that only has its final completion upon our death. Furthermore, we should also notice that the desire for truth that drives us to understand the forms, unlike our bodily desires and fears, is not a desire that exhibits a zero-sum dynamic. If through philosophical investigation I come to understand the form of justice or beauty, I have not consequently prevented you from doing the same. These truths remain just as open to your discovery as they were originally open to my discovery. In addition, our pursuit of knowledge and truth is something that we can participate in jointly through a cooperative process. I can share with you the results of my philosophical investigation, and you can share yours with me. This is what makes the desire for truth different from any of our other bodily desires. Whereas our desire for truth leads us into working harmoniously towards a goal that can be shared by all, our bodily desires lead us into conflict over scarce goods in which we must necessarily find ourselves at odds. For this reason, it is only among a community of those committed to resisting the influence of the body in pursuit of something higher, a community of true philosophers, that genuine social harmony is possible.